You are standing by the edge of the Nile, the morning sun just beginning to soften the indigo sky. The smell of the river, fresh, loamy, eternal, wraps around you like an old linen shawl. Across the gentle hush of water and reed, time in all its ancient stillness is ticking away, not with gears or glass, but with the quiet, persistent drip of water in a clay bowl. This is the world of ancient Egyptian timekeeping, long before wristwatches or pendulum clocks, before quartz crystals and atomic pulses. Ancient Egyptians sought to measure time in a world that seemed to flow like the river itself. And in that pursuit, they gave the world one of its first reliable timekeeping devices, the clepsydra, or water clock. The concept, in truth, was delightfully simple. A vessel, usually stone or ceramic, was filled with water and allowed to slowly drip through a small hole at the bottom. As the water level changed, falling or rising depending on the design, it could be used to track the passage of time. Tick, 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 a trickle of drops, each marking a breath of the day gone by. Now, it might sound inefficient, slow, uninteresting, but therein lies the charm. The clepsydra didn't chase time, it held it, gently, like a priest's whispered chant during a ritual. It allowed temple ceremonies to begin at just the right moment, aligned to celestial rhythms. It regulated court sessions, so that justice could flow as measured as the water itself. The earliest surviving Egyptian water clock is attributed to the reign of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, around 1400 BCE, found in the Temple of Karnak. It was made of alabaster, inscribed with hour lines calibrated to the seasons. The device was simple, but remarkably accurate, at least. By ancient standards, it's worth noting that in Egypt, the length of an hour changed with the seasons. There were 12 hours of daylight and 12 of night, no matter how long or short the day. That meant that an hour in summer was longer than one in winter. So, the water clocks had to be recalibrated throughout the year. This seasonal drift gave Egyptian timekeeping an organic rhythm, more akin to breathing than ticking. The job of managing these clocks often fell to horologoi timekeepers who served in temples. Their role was quiet, methodical, and entirely vital. Their day began before dawn, adjusting the clepsydra for that day's solar hours, consulting astronomical charts carved into limestone tablets. Then they'd oversee temple rituals, spacing hymns and incense offerings by the slow drip of time. You can almost picture them robed in linen, kneeling beside the clock, marking intervals with small, polished stones, or by chanting verses. There, the world was a slow dance between sand, water, and stars. But of course, no tool is perfect. Water would evaporate, temperatures would shift, the holes would clog. On windy days, the drip might be inconsistent. So, the horologoi had backup systems, shadow clocks, and sundials, most of which only worked in daylight and only on sunny days. Even the simplest tasks, calibrating the flow, estimating a drop rate, adjusting for sediment, required a quiet sort of engineering, a patience, a watchfulness. You didn't just tell time, you nurtured it. This timekeeping wasn't for peasants or farmers. Most of Egypt's rural populace told time by instinct: sunrise, midday heat, evening chill. But in temples, time had divine consequences. Ceremonies had to match solar alignments. Offerings had to be made exactly when the sun hit the statue's forehead. The gods, after all, weren't interested in close enough. The water clocks weren't just devices. They were instruments of cosmic harmony, but not every clock was stationary. Some clepsydrae were portable, used by officials or astronomers. Military commanders used them to time drills or coordinate activities during campaigns. In some papyri, references are made to traveling scribes carrying small water clocks with them, packed carefully in linen and reeds, alongside scrolls and ink. The concept also inspired metaphors. In some surviving funerary texts, life itself is described as a bowl slowly emptying, the divine drip of fate slowly ticking toward silence. It's a curious thing, how the simplest of machines can carry such spiritual weight. The idea that water, falling drop by drop, could echo the rhythm of the universe. Of course, the Egyptians weren't the only ones to use water clocks. The Babylonians had their versions, and so did the Chinese, and later the Greeks would refine the concept even further. But the Egyptian clepsydra was not just a device, it was a worldview. And as you watch that last droplet fall, hitting the base of the bowl with the faintest splash, you can't help but wonder, how did the ancients trust so much to water? What kind of society measures life by the patient fall of a drop? Were they not worried about time slipping away? Or perhaps they understood something we'd forgotten. Asterisk, asterisk. You're standing now in the shadowed corridors of Karnak Temple. Sometime around 1300 BCE, the walls are cool stone, carved with sacred hieroglyphs that flicker in the lamplight. Somewhere nearby, a water clock is dripping. The rhythm is steady, but barely audible, soft as a heartbeat, yet strong enough to guide the movements of a civilization. Here, time is not abstract, it's deeply physical. It flows as surely as the Nile, and it must be tracked with care. The horologos, the timekeeper, with silent purpose. His linen tunic is faintly damp with morning dew. His feet shuffle quietly along the packed earth floor. In his hands, he carries a clay vessel with a narrow spout and a rounded base, balanced by years of practice. This clepsydra isn't fancy. No gold, no ornament, just a utilitarian tool in service of a divine schedule. The daily temple schedule is rigid, before the sun has even peeked over the eastern horizon. Priests are already bathing, anointing themselves with sacred oils, and donning ceremonial garments. The statues of the gods are awakened through a series of precisely timed rituals, ritual washing, dressing, offerings of bread, beer, incense. Each step is measured not by human instinct, but by the water clock's slow rhythm, a drop every few seconds, accumulating quietly in a secondary bowl or marked by lines inside the main vessel. You might imagine it all to be deeply spiritual, and yes, it is. But it's also bureaucratic. Hugely so. Egyptian temples were more than houses of worship. They were complex institutions, libraries, storage facilities, food distribution centers, legal courts, and even early forms of banks. And just as a modern corporation runs on schedules, ancient temples ran on time, from grain deliveries to scribal copying, from shift changes to festival preparations. Everything was measured and recorded, and it was the horologos alongside scribes who maintained this sacred schedule. Scrolls of papyrus, detailed temple inventories, and ritual calendars. Some even include formulas for adjusting water clocks based on the day of the year and expected temperature, an ancient form of seasonal calibration. One priest might ask, "How many water measures until sunrise?" Another might respond, 6 measures until first light. 3 more until the god's mouth must be opened. The opening of the mouth was a core ritual ceremony to awaken a statue so it could receive offerings. It had to happen at just the right moment. aligned to the sun's position and the passage of sacred hours. Too early, and the god might not be listening. Too late, and the favor of Ra or Amon could be lost. So yes, time mattered. In the ancient Egyptian worldview, the cosmos was balanced on mat, order, harmony, rightness. Letting time slip, even slightly, was a breach of this cosmic balance. Even the new year, marked by the heliacal rising of Sirius, the star Sopdet, required precise astronomical calculation and timing. A horologos working in tandem with a priest astronomer might spend weeks preparing for it, ensuring that the first ritual offerings took place at just the right moment. Ideally, at sunrise, the day Sirius reappeared, but not all timekeeping was sacred. Downriver in Memphis or up in Thebes, in the more administrative quarters of Egypt, water clocks served less divine purposes. Bureaucrats used them to time speeches during legal proceedings. Yes, the ancient equivalent of courtroom timers. Each speaker might be given a set number of water units to make their case. When the bowl emptied, the argument was over. Imagine the scribe at court tipping his vessel into the clepsydra, watching the slow accumulation as two neighbors argue over grazing rights. He says nothing. He simply notes the time, the testimony, and the slow, quiet passing of both. Then there were schools places where young scribes trained in reading, mathematics, and timekeeping. One exercise involved calculating the volume of water needed to flow for a given number of hours, depending on vessel size and spout width. These weren't just abstract exercises. They trained young minds to think in increments, flow rates, and the invisible mechanics of time. And still further from the sacred, water clocks found use in what we might call ancient logistics. Laborers building tombs in the Valley of the Kings had to work in shifts, regulated by sun, shadow, and yes, water clocks. Overseers tracked break times, shift changes, and tool returns by these steady vessels. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept the projects on schedule. Even in military camps, portable clepsydra were used, though less common than sundial. Water clocks required still surfaces and careful handling. They provided nighttime timing for patrol rotations and watch changes, yet water clocks never spread widely among commoners. For the farmers, fishers, weavers, and potters who filled Egypt's villages, timekeeping was natural. When the sun warmed the stone threshold, it was time to grind grain. When the shadow of the date palm reached the irrigation canal, it was time to rest. Their time flowed in rhythms too, but not in measured droplets. Still, even villagers would sometimes visit the temples, and there, behind the incense smoke and under the watchful eyes of falcon-headed gods, they would hear the drip, drip, drip of time being counted. The sound became synonymous with order, with stability, with the unchanging nature of Egypt itself. But time had competitors. During the long reigns of the New Kingdom pharaohs, Egypt expanded, traded, and conquered. And with that expansion came new ideas. Sundials arrived in more refined forms. Foreign calendars, including Babylonian and later Hittite systems, circulated through diplomatic exchanges. Water clocks had to evolve. Some were redesigned, made wider or with more sophisticated markings. Others added floats and rods to help track time visually. Engineers began experimenting with inflow clocks instead of outflow ones, where water filled a bowl rather than emptied from it, improving accuracy under certain conditions. But this innovation was quiet, gradual, boring even, and yet essential. By the first millennium BCE, Greek engineers would begin to refine the clepsydra further, eventually using it to time speeches in the Athenian courts. Later, the Romans would inherit these systems too, but Egypt remained unique in how it wove timekeeping into the fabric of its religion. In no other culture did the drop of water so closely echo the drop of incense, or the chanted hymn, or the step of the barefoot priest. The passage of time and the passage of prayer were inseparable, and so we return to the temple once more. The Horologos is crouching now beside his clepsydra, inspecting the small trickle as it narrows with the chill of the evening air. He knows, from long habit, that soon the second watch will begin. Another priest will come to continue the sacred vigil. The statue of Ammon must not be left unguarded. He adjusts the flow slightly, wipes the edge of the spout with a linen scrap, and makes a small mark on his tablet. Drip, drip, drip. Each sound is the sound of order, of Mat, of a world held in balance, one drop at a time. But as the stars rise, and a breeze rustles, the papyrus reads outside. A question lingers. Did they ever fear the water might stop dripping? The night air along the Nile is cooler now. The river moves in silence, as it always has, just beyond the temple walls. Inside, the last torch burns low. The Horologos has gone home, and the clepsydra sits undisturbed on its stone pedestal, dripping. In the dark, time, here, has always been more than numbers. It has been measured, worshipped, and trusted. But even the most sacred inventions fade eventually. As you step back into the later centuries of Egyptian history, you begin to feel the long, slow shift in the sands of time, both literally and metaphorically. By the first millennium BCE, Egypt was no longer the world it had once been. Dynasties rose and fell. Nubian kings sat on the throne. Then came the Persians, and after them, the Greeks. The Ptolemaic dynasty, descendants of Alexander the Great's general, brought Greek science, Greek gods, and Greek engineering into the ancient land of Ra. The water clock still existed, but now it had competition. Greek engineers, like Ctesibius, who lived in Alexandria around the 3rd century BCE, transformed the clepsydra from a humble drip bowl into something extraordinary. His designs included gears, floats, siphons, and even mechanical figurines that moved on the hour. Some clocks could strike bells or open doors. The humble Egyptian clepsydruans, content to drip in still silence, had become a marvel of mechanics. But it wasn't truly Egyptian anymore. The priests still used their traditional clepsydry, especially in older temples along the Nile. But the spirit of innovation had left the temple walls and settled into the city's great library instead. Ctesibius's water clocks were no longer tools of cosmic balance. They were displays of intellectual mastery designed to impress, not to serve the gods. In that transformation, something quiet and essential began to dissolve. Egyptian religion itself was slowly retreating. Roman rule, beginning in 30 BCE, further reduced the authority of the temples. Many of the priestly roles became ceremonial. The daily rituals that once required precision timing, offering, dressing, chanting were performed more for tradition than faith, and without the rituals, the clocks grew dusty. Some remained in storage chambers, stone bowls with faded hour lines and limescale crusted inside. Others were repurposed or forgotten. The last of the horologoi died without apprentices. Their knowledge passed into silence, recorded only in fragments on worn papyrus scrolls buried with them. Still, echoes of the clepsydra continued. In Roman cities, lawyers used smaller, more ornate water clocks to time courtroom speeches, much like the Egyptians had done centuries before. In Byzantine monasteries, monks would adopt the clepsydra to time prayers, although candle clocks soon proved more practical. In Islamic scientific centers, from Baghdad to Cordoba, scholars preserved Greek texts describing water clocks, but often neglected their Egyptian origin. Then, in the 13th century, mechanical clocks, powered by weights, driven by gears, began to appear in Europe. From that point on, time would tick, not drip. But even as the clepsydra disappeared from practical use, it lingered quietly in other ways. In language, for instance, ancient Egyptian phrases describing time as falling like water filtered subtly into Coptic and later Arabic thought. Even the imagery of time as a stream, as something you wade through rather than count, has echoes in the old Nile logic of time's flow. And in Egypt itself, the ruins of temples still hold fragments. A clepsydra, carved from alabaster, still sits. In the Karnak Museum, it's not especially ornate, just a round vessel, 33 centimeters tall, with 12-hour markings inside. A small hole near the bottom lets water out at a steady pace. It doesn't work anymore, of course, but once, in the darkness of dawn, it sang the rhythm of time for priests, scribes, and kings. You might wonder why this quiet innovation, so elegant, so foundational, never received the attention that other ancient Egyptian marvels did. There are entire books on pyramids and mummies, hieroglyphs and pharaohs. But the water clock, barely a footnote. Maybe it's because it wasn't built to impress. It didn't shout. It didn't awe. It merely functioned. Its job was to count time so that others could rise. Wash, light incense, chant prayers, open mouths, weigh hearts, and close tombs. And perhaps that's the most quietly heroic job of enabling the rituals. That helped the civilization believe it was in harmony with the universe. The water clock never asked for thanks. It simply dripped, tick, 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 drop by drop, hour by hour, across centuries. A single priest's steady hand on the bowl, adjusting the flow of water just enough to match the sky. In the end, the clepsydra faded not because it failed, but because it belonged to a way of thinking about time that was simply gentler. A time that didn't need to be conquered, sliced, or optimized. A time that flowed. A time that listened. And as you imagine that final droplet falling into the base of the bowl, splashing softly in a temple long buried by sand, you might ask yourself, what would it feel like to live in a world where time was not chased, but simply observed?